Hey, startup founders, impact leaders, and early stage entrepreneurs. Welcome back to the Founder Underground podcast. I'm your host, Ian Scott Cohen. Today, we are joined by one of my legitimately close friends, Erinn Cottman, a dynamic education consultant and the founder of Erinn Cottman Teacher Development. With over 12 years experience as a school leadership coach, Erinn has translated that expertise into coaching and education, in coaching into a thriving independent consultancy, which I know there's a lot of folks trying to do that and make that transition from an expert within a field to a consultant within that field. So in this episode, we're going to explore Erinn's journey from school administrator to business owner, how she leveraged her existing skills to create value as a consultant, and obviously her lessons learned in building a successful coaching practice. We're also going to dive into the mindset shifts and strategies she used to confidently value and price her services. So whether you're thinking about launching your own consulting business or just looking for ways to leverage your expertise in new areas and new spaces, you're going to find a ton of inspiration in this conversation. But first, Erinn, hello. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you. I am well and very excited to be here as your legitimate friend.
Yes. Well, I say that about everybody, and most of the people I've had on so far are my friends. But you and I have go back a little further than some of these folks. But and we also share this education background. I started my career as a teacher. For those who don't know, I was a high school teacher, and that's Erinn and I first crossed paths in the education space. But it was really when you started to think about kind of diving into consultancy, if I remember correctly. And so let's kind of get into that story. You've successfully transitioned from being a school administrator. So you were assistant principal for a while at the KIPP schools, which is one of the biggest charter networks in the country. And now you've gone from that to running a thriving, I must say, consultancy. So I'd love to start with what inspired you to make that leap from administrator to consultant, and what was the most challenging part kind of starting out when you're making that transition?
Yeah, so I will definitely start off by saying it was never in my plan necessarily to do any of this full time.
Sure.
I had a mentor, Dr. Kelly Gunn, who I met through KIPP, and then eventually she went on to consult. And she would kind of tap me in to do certain jobs for her when she didn't have the time. Okay, can you go to this PD? So I had kind of dibbled and dabbled into the space. Enjoyed getting to take some of my knowledge. And like one thing I always say about KIPP is like, their development is like next to none. They really invest and pour a lot of money into making sure that their leaders get like world-class development. So being able to provide PD and capacity building strategies to other schools was really impactful for me because I just enjoy being able to kind of spread some additional knowledge and give it different access. And so COVID happened. I knew I wanted to start this business. It was actually going to be like a side thing. Ian knows I like to travel. So I thought I will start this business and it'll like afford me maybe like 2 more vacations a year kind of thing was really the goal of it. It was very minimal. And so COVID happened, went back into schools, and like, if you're still school based or if you have kids in school, you know that there was a definite shift in the atmosphere, right? I had at that point been an assistant principal for 5 years. I knew I didn't want to be a principal. So I was kind of at a crossroads in general already of like, well, what am I doing next? What will my impact look like in education? Because I don't necessarily want to take the principal track. And I don't want to be an assistant principal the rest of my life. What do I do next kind of thing?
Right. Yeah.
Ended up interviewing for some other roles, got offered a role. And at that point I had already started doing some consulting part-time, and I really felt called that I really wanted to see what could happen if I was able to give all of my attention and energy to this business. At that point, it was very like a bare bones. I was following no smart business practice. It was just
Well, let me pause you there. Let's unpack this, because one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was because the audience that I'm building here is really early stage entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. And that doesn't always mean startup, right? A lot of times it just means people want to build their own business. And more, especially in a kind of a more remote centric world where becoming an independent consultant is easier because you have access to more people more quickly. I think a lot of people are trying that or want to try it, but don't really know what that means and what to do. And so I'm curious is like, why were you really, I guess why did you want to stay in this space and consult and be in that sort of role? Because consulting obviously is different than being within a team and building something, and being around long term to kind of see it through, evolutions. So what was it about being in a consulting role that was really attractive to you?
Yeah, so I still wanted, my passion is still education, and I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that I still was doing my part to improve educational outcomes for kids. And so it felt like for me, I can actually expand my reach. And so it's similar like
Mm.
when you leave a classroom, right? When people leave the classroom, often they'll say, well, now I'm getting to touch more classrooms, right? Because I'm a coach or I'm an AP or whatever the case may be. I almost
Yep.
looked at it the same exact way. Now I can work with more schools, more teachers, more kids. So that was one. And I think also too, I also very much had other examples around me of education consultants who actually were making the impact as far
Mm.
as being able to see the long-term goal, right? So one of my longest clients I've been with since 2020. So
Wow.
most of my clients I've signed on and worked with at least 2 years, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
One,
Yeah.
it's hard to see an impact in I rarely actually do one-off like PD development sessions because
Yeah.
we all know like, okay, thank you. I've listened to your words. Goodbye. Right. I
Right.
know that
Right.
it's not going to necessarily make a huge difference in their instruction the next day.
Sure.
So I actually prefer to work with clients that I know I can have a long-term relationship so that I can actually see the impact of our time together. But
Gotcha.
the other thing was for me is I don't consider I've since stopped saying this, but at the time I didn't consider myself to be a business owner. So was
Mm.
familiar to me was being able to use my knowledge and talents. I know I was a darn good AP, and so like I knew and a good coach. So I knew that I could use that expertise
Yep.
to create a viable business for myself. The backlog was learning the business part. I always say I
Yeah.
can do the PD
Yeah.
part in my sleep. That's fine. I can make the
Right.
PD. I can facilitate. It's going to be great. It's the business part that was actually the ramp up, and probably the scary part was the business part, not necessarily the idea of like the day to day of the business, if that makes sense. The
Yeah.
client
Yeah.
delivery.
Absolutely. Definitely, definitely. We'll come back to the business part because I know that's a huge barrier for a lot of folks who are starting any kind of business. I see it all the time. And one of the reasons why I put a lot of the content out there that I'm doing is to kind of remove that veil. It's like I was a philosophy major, I wasn't a business person, but
Mm-hmm.
now I've started multiple businesses. And a lot of it is just there's this idea that you can't learn this stuff unless you go to school for it, which is if there's anything that's not true about, it's business, because there's so many stories about entrepreneurs who are not classically trained as business people. And so we'll get into the business side of this thing. I want to first go into how did you identify the value of your expertise? How did you zero in on, okay, I want to keep helping schools, but I want to do it on my own in my own way. How did you determine, okay, what am I actually going to focus on and how do I translate that into some sort of offering?
Well, it changed a lot.
Okay.
I think like
Good to know.
most, yeah. So
Yeah.
when I first, so one, I knew that there was a need because I had either examples around me or like I'm school based. So I'm watching schools pay, I'm watching my school pay to bring people in to teach me something. So I know that there's a budget or there's some sort of funding somewhere in my
Yeah.
brain, right, for this.
Right. Right.
I knew that my favorite part of my job was development of people. And so I started off in the beginning wanting to do leadership development. So coaching principals, assistant principals, and like early level leaders. Enjoyed that. But also, as I kind of got further into the work, what I really found when I really dug through kind of doing that work was the part of my job as assistant principal that I really loved was actually instructional coaching and helping to
Mm,
build capacity instructionally and academically. So when
sure.
I really thought about the parts of my job that I enjoyed before the business, that was it. And I niched down even further. So it was like I kind of start with this big umbrella of leadership development, right?
Yep.
Which, if I'm being really honest, a lot of people, that's what they, zoom in on. But then
Sure.
being able to niche down even further and say, no, I actually work with instructional leaders. So if you are working your school and you are directly in alignment with running and driving academics, I'm your girl. If you need
Yeah.
to train your instructional coaches, a role that traditionally doesn't get a lot of care and attention, I'm your
Right.
girl,
Right.
right? And so I essentially, being that I was so well versed with one, the roles because I've done them, but also the problems that come with those roles, I was able to
Yep.
niche down. But it definitely went, I did like a whole rebrand of the
Mm,
business at one point. So there's also
gotcha.
a place where you have to give yourself time to see, because you really don't, until you put it out there, you don't really know
Right.
necessarily, how you will differentiate yourself or how people will receive it. And I have found more success the more that I niche down and giving myself
Yeah.
the grace and opportunity to adjust. The other really big thing someone told me very early on that I'm so grateful I did was to brand myself.
Mm.
And the idea was like, if you decide 2 years from now you want to sell socks,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you're not having to start completely over. My company's Erinn Cottman, my Instagram is like everything is, and I know I did a good job at it because at this point people call me by my whole name. They don't just say Erinn, they just say Erinn Cottman. And
There you
so,
go. Yeah. It's a
and
good
so,
sign.
but so when I made that pivot, it wasn't odd because really people were more associated with me as a brand than they were like the technical logistics of what type of coaching I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If I when I moved to podcasting, speaking now, right? Like, so I would also say thinking about your business, like I have to be a part of your brand. And like it just, I know some people don't like to hear that, but like
Yeah.
depending on the type of business and startup you have, you are going to be your best like marketing material
Right.
along the way.
Yeah, no, I love that. So you really talked about two major things. The first thing was finding a niche and zeroing in and kind of drilling down on that niche. And I think this is one of the lessons that a lot of, new entrepreneurs and consultants learn the hard way too, where it's like when you start out, you feel like, okay, well, I could do a lot of things. So I'm going to try to kind of like take any opportunities I can create. And because I need to make some money and I want to get this thing going. And so you just kind of start putting yourself out there in a bunch of different ways. But as I constantly work with founders on and entrepreneurs on, it's like, it might seem counterintuitive to focus because you feel like you're limiting your audience. But in reality, especially as an independent consultant, which is why it's such an attractive pursuit, is that you don't actually need a ton of business to be very, very successful as an independent consultant.
Yeah.
And you need people to understand what you do and, so that they always know that. And if you do a bunch of stuff, then you're kind of a utility player. It becomes hard to really fit you into certain circumstances. And so as you found, and as I think it's a great lesson for people to learn, is like the more you focus in on a niche problem or audience or service, whatever it is, then it's easier to kind of build a base around that. Ideally, you pick a niche though that has enough customers to build a business
Yeah,
for.
exactly.
So you picked coaching, broadly speaking, I guess I'll say, because it's something that you really love to do and clearly had a talent for. And so how did you kind of have to work through translating your expertise in coaching into an actual like pitch to people? How would you approach your initial leads
Yeah.
and customers?
So here's something that's actually very similar. I do think like consulting can be very like its own kind of business model, but
Yeah.
the marketing aspect is very much the same. Like, what's the pain point and how can I help you solve it? And like
Yeah.
that's really
Right.
it.
Right.
And so oftentimes because really my customer, while I'm working directly with like assistant principals and instructional coaches, my customer really is the principal. And so I kind of target them by saying like, listen, I know you want to support these folks in your building, but I also know what a principal life is like and you don't have time.
Right.
Let me
Right.
help you do that effectively, right?
Yeah.
And let me partner with you, right? To make sure that they get what they need and being able to show the through line of my support to student outcomes. So the marketing piece is actually very much the same. It's like marketing 101, pain point, right?
Right.
And how I'm going to help you solve it. And then also and then being able to know what are the potential like naysayers going to say about it, right? Oh, well, it's like, and being able to have an answer for those distractions of why this may not be a smart investment. I also, in the beginning as a consultant, relied on my network a lot. Being
Sure.
at KIP
Yeah.
for 15 years, I had, just made a lot of connections outside of KIP, in KIP, whatever. And so that was another way too of like, and I think if you're leveraging the talents you already have, if you've been doing good work, and
Yeah.
it speaks for itself, it's actually not as hard of a transition to get someone to take you on it as a consultant role because you've already shown. I actually like no one was curious about my skill set,
Right.
because I
Yeah.
already built that essentially brand name already beforehand by just
Yeah.
doing really solid work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it speaks to your ability too, right? And I would also say to people who are thinking about making this transition, it might be useful even to, and it sounds like you kind of did this, whether it was intentional or not. You said you had a few different little kind of project opportunities before you even went into this full time. I would say to aspiring consultants out there, people just trying to establish an independent thing, there's no reason you can't really float this stuff before you even start, right? Because if your network isn't giving you some affirmations that you're kind of on the right track or they'd be interested, then maybe that signals something else. Maybe you're not focused on the right thing, or maybe your quality of work isn't there yet. I mean, this is one of those things where I think in our day and age where everybody wants to be their own boss, everybody wants to do their own thing, which I am fully on board with. We also, you can't skimp on quality, right? Like you actually need to be able to do this stuff well and have an approach. And so, one of the things you said, aside from the finding a niche, was having to put yourself out there really and just kind of be the face of yourself. Because as a consultant, that is what you're selling. You're saying, look, you need my brain in the room, and it's going to add X, Y, and Z. So what was that experience like for you? Because I know how anxiety inducing it can be for people to start like posting on Instagram or like putting out blog posts or just emailing their friends saying, hey, I started this. Did you have anxiety when you were doing that? Or was that kind of, you had already done enough of it inside the school building that it didn't really register as much?
It was scary. I mean, I felt stupid. I mean, for being honest, at the beginning, I was just like this.
Yeah. Please be honest. That's all.
It's a lot to do, but I remember, my first couple, maybe a week into posting on my Instagram, I had someone text me. They're like, I see what you're doing. I like it. Like they could see the shift, right? In right. Oh, okay, I see what you're doing there, But the reality is you have to begin to build credibility. And part of being a consultant also is being a thought leader. And if you aren't able to speak about what you do, and taking the client transformation, right? Or whatever the case may be, you're going to be dead in the water. And so social media, marketing, like all of those things, talking about your business. I still remember I think my pitch is different to this day every time I say it, because it just kind of depends on the mood I'm in, when someone's like, what does your business do, or the case may be. Sure. So still, I think there's times where it still feels awkward to talk about your business. But in a consultant space, it's imperative that you can talk about your business, because
right.
A lot of it is networking. I don't, especially in education, and I think it's true probably for most fields. Everybody knows each other. All the principals know each other, or work together at this school, or so. You want to make sure that when you're given the opportunity to talk about your business and what you do, that you market yourself by, I use every opportunity I have with someone to make an impression. I say all the time, I just want to get the call, because I know if I can get them in front of me, I can sell them, because I know that I'm my best asset, I know that you're going to enjoy working with me. I know that you're going to get what you need. And I know that I know that you're going to be like, yeah, she's cool. I think not only is she cool, she's smart. We can work with her,
Right. Yeah.
And you're going to get, you translate that more by being present on, whether it's your social media, your marketing, in person, whatever. You can't just hide behind, it's not McDonald's. You can't just hide behind a logo and think that is going to build the credibility there for you.
Yeah. How did you decide so you're on Instagram, obviously. Where else do you put your time from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, we just started doing more LinkedIn, mainly because... I
noticed that, by the way. Looks good.
See? Mainly because I don't like... I shouldn't say that. I don't... LinkedIn, it confuses me. But anyway, right? So I was a little about LinkedIn, right? So we started putting more LinkedIn content out there. And then we do run ads. That's been something that we just started doing. We just kind of reached a threshold revenue-wise where it was like, okay, it's time to start running some ads.
And just to level set, I should have done this at the beginning. So how long have you been doing this now?
We'll be 5 July 1st.
5 years. Holy shit.
I know. Time has gone
Yeah.
by.
Damn. Okay. Gotta speed this thing up. And just so people know, without so you've broken 6 figures revenue annually multiple times.
Yes.
We'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yes.
And I believe you've grown even beyond that to an extent, or at least are on your way.
Yes,
So just so
yes,
people know, like
right.
this is real success you've had, and started out just as a one person show,
Yes.
which is the ideal, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
what people who get into this, they're looking to do. So, but you started on Instagram marketing wise, and then you have recently added LinkedIn, started running some ads here and there. I know you have a couple of people now who kind of work part time or on
Yeah.
contract for you.
Yep. We have a podcast also, as just like another way to get my voice out there.
Yep.
So we have a podcast. We also do like a monthly webinar. Again,
Hmm.
getting new seats and folks and like who may not be familiar with who I am.
Yeah.
Um,
How did you decide on this sort of constellation of approaches? Was it just, is there some strategy behind it, or is it more of like what you're comfortable with, or a mix of both?
yeah. Strategy. Yeah. So, you know, consulting contracts, they're not $10 investments, and
Right. Right.
they're typically, five-figure investments, and
Yeah.
so people's first interaction with you can't be when you're trying to convince them to have a five-figure contract with you, right?
Yeah. And they're gonna look you up, right? No matter
Right,
what, they're
right.
gonna look you up.
Yeah.
It's a
And
fact.
so the webinar is free. It allows me to get people in the space, show them what I know. Again, selling myself, right? So now you get to spend an hour with me, talking with me. I'm going to make sure you walk away thinking that was the best hour of your life, right? Of that
Yeah.
webinar.
Right.
So again, showing them, hey, here's what you do. It's like it is the process. Like it's gonna take you, especially in this time and age, 5 to 7 real touch points with someone for you to be like, okay, I'm gonna think about even the biggest brands
Yeah.
that you shop with regularly that you trust. You may get an email from them and you're like, oh yeah, I really want that. But you don't necessarily
Mm.
stop right then and get it. You go do some other thing, right? And then it
Yeah. Yeah.
takes, right? And so that's essentially what I'm doing is just giving them touch points. So my Instagram's a
Yeah.
touch point. My podcast is a touch point. The podcast came from I wanted to do more podcasts, and instead of waiting for someone to invite me to them, I was like, well, I'm just going to create. And then that way I have a space to
Yeah.
put my voice out there and I can
Yeah.
use it in marketing as well.
Yeah.
Um, the podcast is that the webinar. So it's essentially it's just like exposure, exposure, exposure. Here I am,
Yeah.
here I am, here I am. So that then when we do start doing discovery calls and conferences and those events that say are lower ticket items, you're you're stair stepping them essentially into that larger contract. But to think
Yeah.
that you're just going to show up on someone's doorstep and they're going to be like, here's $50,000
Yeah.
is not
Yeah.
necessarily always the case.
No, and it's tough, right? Like I think so. I mean, what you're describing is really your marketing and sales funnel, which no matter what form
Yep.
of business you have, you got to have some sort of it. I do consulting work as well, and I think there's this. All of us want somebody to come and tap us on the shoulder and be like, Erinn, I've known you're amazing, and here's $1 million check for contract, and I didn't even see any of your stuff,
Right.
right? Like we all want that, but it's just not how the world works, right? I mean, if you think about what you think about all day, we think about our own problems, our own situations, our own things, and trying to cope with whatever situations we're in. Everybody else is the same exact way, right? Like
Yep.
nobody's sitting there and like thinking about you the whole time. And so you've got to be present. And because in our world full of distractions and media, I mean, there's just so much. And this is where, and I give this advice to organizations too. It's like using your expertise is the easiest way to get
Yep.
started, right?
Yep.
Because that's what you're selling anyways. And if you're having trouble figuring out what your expertise is, then I would just say, well, maybe think about all the times you've had conversations with coworkers or colleagues about what's going wrong or
Yep.
what you would do differently. Start
Yep.
there, right? Mine for stuff and start kind of piecing it together. So for you, I'm curious how you went from, all right, I have expertise in coaching, I have a network in schools, I want to stay in schools. How did you translate that, or did you translate it into some sort of coherent package or
Yeah.
offering? Like, how did you productize
Yeah.
basically your expertise?
I looked at competitors. So who's already doing this?
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot of larger companies who do what I do, right? So what are they doing?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do their packages look like? And then that way I started off, and also because I knew I wanted to have longer impact and I knew there was also more money in it, I started doing more year-long packages. So instead of
Yeah.
saying I will come and do these 2 PDs for you, it says, hey, this school year for 12 months, for 10 months, myself and my company will support and consult for you for the years. That's way
Yeah.
more appealing to a principal to hear. All year, I get this level of support, right?
Right. Right.
that I know
Yeah.
I'm going to need. So I really just looked at what was happening around me and then used that to say, okay, I'm going to price myself under that because I know I also want to be competitive, right?
Mm.
And I know I don't have the big name yet, so I'm going to price myself under that, which is a journey in itself. In the beginning, everyone laughs at me like, "Oh, you were doing volunteer work." I was like, "I was. I didn't, I had to
Yeah.
build up my confidence to be able to send over some large contracts."
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's essentially what it is like I just looked at what other people's packages were. I also
Yeah.
knew from being school based where people's packages fell short for me. Like, okay, well, when we worked
Mm.
with this particular company, this part was good,
Yeah.
but this part, because what I hear often, the other selling point that was actually has really been one that I didn't necessarily anticipate that has
Yeah.
been great was how am I different than the larger company? Because a lot of these companies spend a lot of money, and
Right.
then they support the school maybe 2 or 3 times a year. They don't have
Mm.
any other significant touch points, so they don't know the staff intimately. They don't know the principal intimately. They don't know the right. And then they
Yeah.
pop into the school a couple times a year, give some feedback that's not aligned to what's actually happening in the content, right? So my kind
Right.
of benefit has very much been that I didn't expect was like almost like I'm local, you can have me, I'm more hands on,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to be
Yeah.
hands
Yeah.
on. You're not going to just be another school on a list of 800 schools.
Right, right. Yeah. And it's a great point. It's something that startups have the same kind of principles, or at least we advise them to. Early on, it's easy to look at your disadvantages, right? It's easy to say, oh, this company has so much more resources. They're going to outspend me marketing wise. They can do all these things. But you have to do what's in research. So there's several characteristics of successful entrepreneurs. One of them is called effectual thinking, which just means starting from what do you have? What do you have at your disposal? Like, what do you have to work with? And for you and for a lot of new organizations too, one of the advantages you have is that you can provide very high touch, kind
Mm-hmm.
of white glove
Mm-hmm.
service, right? And you can go that extra mile. You can send that extra email. You can go on an extra call. And that's not to say you should do it to the place where you run yourself out of business.
Because that
But
happens too. You can be
yeah,
too white glove.
yeah, absolutely. But in the beginning, at
Mm-hmm.
least, it's a way to,
Mm-hmm.
transform your seemingly deficiency versus a big player into a strength that they could never possibly do
Absolutely.
just because they're driven by different stuff. So I love that. I think that's really important. So let's dig into the business side of this. All right. So you're a former school administrator, you don't have an MBA or anything. And so you kind of alluded to it earlier in the conversation. Starting an independent coaching practice definitely comes with lessons learned, especially around the business side. So I'd love to just, if you could highlight did you make any big mistakes early on that you'd be willing to
Yeah.
share, or lessons you learned like very fast?
Yeah, I would just say build the business infrastructure, the back end early. I think some people kind of are
Mm.
like, oh, you don't really need that. Or, I think coming from a
Well, so
teaching
what are
back,
you referring to when you say that?
go ahead and get a accountant, right? Like you can use services
Mm.
like Collective or, like people will tell you, oh, you can do it, in the beginning. It's like, you can't. Don't do that. Just go ahead and pay, if you already have someone you're using, but like really find a company that's going to let you do that, right? And do it right and well for you. I
Yeah.
would say, whatever operating system you're going to be using as far as like are using just Google Drive folders. Like what do you do? As our business grew, I had to hire someone to come in and like set up automations and get everything to talk to each other and like smooth out my
Yeah.
onboarding plan, right? Because as I was getting
When
busier,
did you make those decisions? Like, how did you know when you started needing to process?
yeah, when it was impacting when it was slowing down intake, right? So essentially, if I'm doing client delivery all day and I know I need to invoice someone and I'm not invoicing, it's taking me 2 days to invoice them because I'm so focused
Yeah.
on client delivery than getting off work and doing all the things, right? Like it was like slowing down the process. Or if someone says, hey, can you send me a
Yeah.
proposal? And it's taking me 2 days to send you a proposal because I'm doing client delivery,
Right.
right? So like
Yeah. Yeah.
thankfully now I have a team. There's a team of three of us, but in the beginning when it was just me, I convinced myself I didn't necessarily need those processes. But
Yeah. Of
if
course,
I
you want to
had
save the
had
money and
some,
figure it
yeah,
out.
exactly. But if I had some level of that, it does ease
Yeah.
some of that initial like startup burnout because now it's
Yeah.
like I'm sending a proposal at 8 p.m., versus
Right.
if I
Right.
had that system set up, those things could be done more efficiently.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. Something that I've learned and thankfully I've gotten good at is just, in the beginning of anything, turning everything into templates,
Yep.
kind of making sure processes are quick and easy in the beginning. Because this does happen, especially with people in consultancy roles or who have a consultant background. You're used to doing everything on your own. But the problem is your time is your money, right? And so if you end up spending a whole day on accounting and
Yep.
proposal delivery, which is like, okay, if somebody else can do it, then it's not something, it eventually becomes a point where it's not something you should be doing because you are the valuable thing, right? And your
Exactly. You're
work
the
is the
money, you're
valuable
the
thing.
money maker.
Right, right. Yeah. And nobody, you're not, yeah, I've been there too many times and it's tough, right? It's tough to find that balance. Like, when do you know to spend money on yourself and your business? And how do you know to make
Yeah.
that investment? Is there anything that, any other kind of tips on that specific thing that you would give to someone kind of starting out?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the beginning it would be knowing like, so I also implemented profit first, but a little like maybe like the profit first method for I guess I don't call it accounting, but financially how you run your business. Do you know what profit first?
Why don't you enlighten us?
Oh Lord. Okay. So
If,
profit first.
as to the best you can in
Okay,
30
it's like
seconds.
essentially it's a theory, but the idea is that you pay yourself first as the owner, right? And then
Mm,
depending, and it kind of has a scale of like depending on how much your business is making, what percentage of that should go to operations, taxes, profit, you as the
mm,
owner, and I forget the other. I think there's another category. So that piece where you're feeling like, oh, I want to pay, I want to feel the I guess payment of of all that I'm doing. That profit first model allows you to
right.
see that yes, I have profited, right? And then knowing very clearly, hey, this is my operation budget. So this means this is how much money I have to run this business. This is so if I can
Yeah.
afford to spend that to make this investment, fine. But if me spending that is going to create some sort of shift in the business, then it's not ready. I'm not ready to spend that yet, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's also
Sure.
there's also evolution, right? So before I had a VA before I ever had a full time assistant, right? Like there's
Hmm.
evolution,
Yeah.
there's evolution in this process for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was the Fiverr Upwork queen, in the beginning, right? So you
Hmm.
just find your way, but there's like levels
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Any lesson learned about hiring contractor help?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just did it for the first time this year. I would say it's an amazing. Well, I should say this. I had a contractor. I hired my first contractor for client delivery this year,
Okay.
and I would say to me that's where networking comes in because as soon as I had a client that I needed to service that I knew I couldn't, I knew exactly who to call because I
Mm.
maintained strong relationships within the industry, and I knew who was a good
Yeah.
coach. I knew who
So
was
this is a
Jewish.
contractor coming in and actually delivering your methodology
Yes.
to a client. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Because I
Which
knew
is
I
which
just
is great. I mean,
physically
that's a
could not.
huge step, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
And so, but
Okay.
I didn't have to search for her because I had maintained strong relationships. I knew her coaching well. So I already knew
Yeah.
if the time came, I knew who I was going to tap. So I think it's also about just making sure, like, even in that consulting space where because you're working alone a lot, you know, are staying in the loop of like the industry and who's around and what's happening
Yeah.
because there may be some synergy there that you can leverage.
Yeah. 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 No, that's a great point. It does. It gets very easy to become isolated and disconnected from
Yep.
what's actually happening in the
Hmm.
space, especially in the education space where there's so many kind of political shifts and
Yep.
winds and trends and local things. So
Yep.
yeah, I think it's a great point. So I wanna transition to our last kind of major topic here before we close out, and that's around pricing.
Oh,
So, we started to talk about this a little bit before, but pricing can be one of the toughest aspects for new consultants and new service providers generally. So, how did you approach valuing yourself and your services? And were there mindset shifts that you needed in order to change like how you felt and what you felt like you were worth?
was there? Yes. Pricing is hard. It's
Sure.
hard. Pricing is hard because you almost like put like a personal connection to what you're putting out there. So it's like if I'm sending
Yeah.
someone an $80,000 contract at once,
Mm-hmm.
there's a piece where you're like, am I worth someone giving me $80,000?
Yeah,
Right? It's
totally.
right. And so you
Yeah.
personalize in a lot of ways what you're sending,
Mm-hmm.
but also the first time you sign one, you're like, oh, done, right? Because now you've got
Mm-hmm.
essentially like you've pressure tested that people will pay you
Yeah.
that, and so once you've done that, you're like, oh,
Right.
great, I'm done. I'm not going
Right.
anywhere else for it's a lot easier, but it's a journey. It takes time. And then honestly, the first time that you sign a contract with someone and you end up working way over that, and like
Mm-hmm.
you'll swear to yourself never
Yeah.
again, because you'll be like, that was not worth it. That was not worth, I should have charged them
Right.
more. That was not worth it. But you just have to give yourself grace to
Yeah.
figure that out. You won't know sometimes until you're in it that like, oh, that's way too low.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, we tend to vastly underestimate the amount of work things take and also underestimate usually what people are willing to pay us for that kind of stuff, right? Like I'm sure,
Absolutely.
once you landed your first 5-figure deal even, it was probably like, okay, shoot, can work, right? This is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, are there any moments that you can remember that really solidifies like, shit, I need to charge more, or this is the right way to value my services?
I wouldn't say charge more, but what I did have a client that I just really didn't enjoy working with. That
Mm.
later, and they actually paid really well.
Yeah, it's actually a really important topic.
Yeah, and later
People,
I was
you
like,
shouldn't take every
oh,
client, right?
yes, that exactly. But I was like, why? I was miserable for a whole year, you know?
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
also learned the lesson just of like vetting, in the beginning you're just so happy to have clients.
right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I think it's one of the things that, we don't think enough about. And I'm wondering if connection got cut out here. We'll give it a second, see if you pop back in. Hopefully it's not mine. So it sounds like her computer shut down. So I'm going to keep talking and maybe we'll decide to cut this out and, figure it out later. She's texting me right now. Okay. So what we were just talking about was this idea that sometimes you actually don't want the client. And, when you're thinking about building your own business, your own consultancy, whatever it is, there is this kind of look. You want to make money, right? You want to build a business. You feel like you gotta take the clients that you can get, and inevitably you're going to get a client that is just too taxing, or they don't buy into what you're doing, or they don't deliver on their promises. It could be anything. And it becomes really hard to have that conversation with yourself where you say, okay, is this because I need to get better at what I'm doing? Or is this because they're just not the right fit for me as a provider? And it's a really powerful feeling to be able to say, you know what, this client is not for me any longer, and saying no. In agency work, they talk about firing clients all the time because eventually your relationship might run its course, or they might not be a good fit. And if you're getting into your own independent consultancy, you're probably doing it because part of it is you want to focus on the work that you enjoy doing with the people you enjoy doing it with. And so there's pressure, obviously, financially to take whatever contracts you can get. And I wouldn't advise turning down contracts early on if you're having a tough time getting them. But it does get to a place where you have to say to yourself, is this, did I just trade one bad situation or situation I was kind of tired of professionally for another one? And a lot of that in consulting work has to do with the clients that you choose and the clients that you work with. And so one of the things that I actually did in a past venture with some folks was we actually created kind of a rubric for assessing whether a potential client was right for us. And that was a part of our consideration process. Now, we didn't tell the client that, but, in startups and, software and that kind of thing, a lot of times we talk about ICP, ideal customer profile. That isn't just because they are ideal to sell to, but it can also be used in the reverse as someone who's an ideal customer for you, right? Someone you can serve very well and get a lot out of and value being a provider for. And so I think, that's a lot of what Erin's talking about, and something that's really, really tough to just appreciate when you're starting out as a consultant. And the other thing she mentioned that I think is really important to kind of double click on is this idea that if you're a consultant, your name is going to be attached to the people that you work with to some extent, right? Maybe not in a huge way, maybe not in like a massively public way, but in the beginning, as you try to build up a track record and find referrals and connections and that kind of stuff, it's important to think about this. And Erinn is back.
Wait, now I can't hear you. Hold on
I'm
one
glad
second.
your
I can't
computer
hear you in
survived the
my...
transition, Erinn.
What is happening? I can't.
Well, take your time. Technical difficulties.
Her consultancy needs a new computer.
Yeah.
The other day, my charger finally died, which was great. It was like,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's time to invest in some
I knew you
hardware.
were going to say that. I knew you were going to be like, all right, Miss Consultant, how about you buy a new computer?
Yeah. Doing so well, I can't afford a MacBook. Well, anyways, Erinn, I was just talking to the audience about, I did actually, while you were restarting your computer, I was just kind of digging in more to this idea of like how important it is to be real about what clients are actually good for you and what clients are not. And in the beginning, you're probably going to have one or two clients at least that end up being really not right for you. And because part of this is going back to why you're getting into this work in the first place, right? Like you get into this work because not just because you want to be in a different sort of atmosphere, but also because you want to do the work that you enjoy and do it with people that you enjoy working with, ideally. And that's not always going to be the case, but sometimes it just gets to the place where it's like the relationship is too taxing to be worth the money.
And consulting
not
is
to
hard
mention,
because they don't have to implement what you're saying.
Right. It's so
So
frustrating.
there's that, right? So sometimes it was like, not only do I not enjoy the environment that I'm in, but you're not actually even implementing anything that I'm suggesting.
Right.
So
What do you do in that situation where they're
yeah,
just
I
not
mean,
even doing the stuff?
yeah, I've had eventually where after like long months of trying to figure out what is the barrier, because at first you want to really just say, okay, what's the barrier? Is this like a skill thing, a will thing?
Yeah.
You know, are we just maybe misaligned? Do I need to reset? Do we not understand each other? Like how this would work?
Right.
Because sometimes people, you are there in service of them and they're your client, but sometimes you have to remind people like, I don't, I'm not an employee either though, right? So like sometimes the lines
Yeah.
can get blurred of like what it is that you think I'm here to do, you know?
Right.
And so when that happens, you just have to make sure that you're able to reset the relationship. And then if it's just not working, it's just not working. Like, and I had
Yeah.
to do that. I had to finish out my contract. I've never been in a situation where it was so bad that I couldn't finish out the contract, but I finished out
Yeah.
my
Well, that's
contract and then
helpful.
I made
Yeah.
it clear of like, I don't think you guys are in a place to implement what I'm asking. And so let's maybe revisit at another time.
Yeah. Revisiting is a great way to just reframe something and be like, it's not right for right now, but you can say, why don't we just revisit it next year or next quarter? Yeah, I did that
A
recently.
yeah.
Yeah. It's just one of those things.
And then secretly I'm
Um,
like, we're never revisiting this.
Right. Whoops, my email inbox is full or something. Yeah. No, I think that's a great place to break on. I appreciate you restarting your computer and making it back, Erinn. But I want to close this out here and reserve the right to come back and check in with you at a
Absolutely.
later date. So with that, huge thank you to Erinn Cottman for joining us and sharing your insights on the transition to consulting, valuing your expertise, and building a sustainable business. Her story is such a powerful reminder that our skills and experiences often hold a lot more value than you actually realize. It's just about learning how to package them and present them and then getting comfortable and confident in that. To learn more about Erinn's work, definitely visit www.erinncottman.com. I don't know why I had to give the W's
There's
there.
a
I
lot
feel
of
like people know
W's.
that. But 7 W's before hers. And you can also connect with Erinn Cottman on LinkedIn. That's Erinn with 2 N's. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, share, leave us a review. It definitely helps us reach more entrepreneurs, founders, change makers. And let us know what's one piece of Erinn's advice that you're excited to apply in your own journey. Reach out in the comments or tag us on social media. But until next time, let's keep getting out there and building the future. And thank you, Erinn, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll see you next time.